We'd like to welcome everyone to the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club. We meet here every Wednesday, every other Wednesday in honor of William Mackey Jr., El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, Brother Assad, Amos Wilson, Alton Maddox, Minister Khalid, zoom in on there, Louis Ray, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Ivan Van Sertima, and all the historians who gave up fame and fortune to burn the midnight oil, Miss Leola Maddox, because they believed in bringing the truth and information to the global people. Miss Leola Maddox, who had an old car, and she drove that old car from Patterson to the United African Movement because she believed in bringing information to the community, and she used to eat her lunch there because she wanted to bring people together. So for the people that came out to support the Mackey's group, give yourself a great big hand. We are the people that come out and support for information. We never want to forget Miss Leola and all the Renovo Rashidi who went back and forth to the motherland and bring information. So we never want to forget these people. So we're going to bring the camera over to the Amos collection. We have these books in honor of Amos Wilson and African World Info Systems. We have Blueprint for Black Power, Amos's Classic, The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat toward the Reclamation of the African Mind. We also have Black-on-Black Violence, The Psychodynamic of Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination. And every talking head mayor in every big city town, from New York to California, Africa to the Sudan, black on black violence, we doing it to each other, but Amos went beyond the call of duty. The psychodynamics of black self-annihilation in service of white domination. So we are still being dominated and don't even know about it. The developmental psychology of the black child. Amos's Classic, The Falsification of African Consciousness. Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children. Issues of Manhood in Black and White. African-centered consciousness versus the New World Order. Revealing the unspeakable Bible verses. The truth about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and the Holy Trinity. S.K. Damiana, Distorted Truths and the Bastardization of African Cosmology. And we have this classic in honor of Louis Ray Rivera, who came when Professor Mackey left us too soon. Louis Ray took up the mantle, and he came down here and he would speak for hours and hours and hours. And the good thing about it, he only lived a couple of blocks away, and he would speak, and we would walk him home, and Louis Ray would talk for another hour and a half. And Louis Ray was born in Brooklyn, and he died in 2012, born in Bed-Stuy, went to Boys High, City College, professor of African American Studies, Caribbean History, Culture. He authored 3 previous volumes of poetry. Who pays the cost? This one for you is Scattered Sculptures. A recipient of over 20 awards and a facilitator of more than 200 books. Rivera was considered a necessity bridge between the African and Latino American community, and his works with musicians conditions, his employment in the court system, and his night education programs, and as creative writing impulse have culminated in this visionary work. We want to honor the great scholar Louis Ray Rivera. And he knew my whole family up in Monderson. Okay, I'm going to have some other publications for the listening audience to do your own work. You can purchase these books, we have a few of them, or you can get these books on any thrift books, big deal books, Amazon, and all other book publishers, and you can get these books and do your reading, your research, and get the information. But first and foremost, we want to honor the master, Dr. Ben, in his book, Black Man of the Nile and His Family. And Dr. Ben did the research on Kemet, Aquaman in Africa where there wasn't too many computers. And he documented it all. The hieroglyphics, the sciences. So that Dr. Ben, the great one, we have this book in honor of Dr. Ben. The second classic is Dr. Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of Black Civilization, Great Issues of Erase from 1445 BC to 2000 AD. And Chancellor Williams went beyond the call of duty. And in this book, it'll tell you the mistakes we made and how they came into Africa and destroyed it, and how we have suffered. Dr. Chancellor Williams did a good job on the mistakes we made in Africa. We want to salute Dr. Chancellor Williams. So I got some other stuff here. Big ups to Professor Mackey, A Modern Woman's Look at the Orthodox and Hasidic Judaism, A Hole in the Sheet, Evelyn Kane. A lot of things is happening in America. But people don't want to look at what's going on behind the scenes. World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, the Great Reset. But it's a man behind this stuff. And one of the guys that just picked this up is inside the secret network of George Soros, the man behind the curtains. But this ain't the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. Once you start reading about him, oh man. But I'm glad he's being exposed, because we have to expose these people. Everywhere you look at, you see weed shops. The state of New York selling weed, the city, the mayor promoting weed shops all over the place. They smoking it all out in the street, all in your face, rolling it anywhere. But there's somebody behind this. And I just happened to pick this up, Dope Incorporated, the British Opium War Against the World. And on page 48, not an old-looking George Soros, but a young-looking George Soros. The man behind the medical marijuana. So I want to thank Lyndon LaRouche in this classic. In honor of Randy Short, Slavery Mastery, the Impact of Religious Slavery Revealed. Brother Truss Graham and Louis Ray Rivera, Max Demon, Jews, God, and History. And a lot of stuff that you read about, they made it up. It's not true, it's false. But this book is something else, and we want to thank people like Dr. Ben and our speaker tonight on bringing up a lot of stuff that's, they just say. Ayo Kamati, in his classic, Jews Are the Problem. This small book has a power pack of information and research on food shortages, economic collapse, so we want to salute Ayo Kamati. In his book, Jews Are the Problem, Money Tree Publishing, you can get this copy of this book. Now these books right here, I got another book I just happened to pick up, and it's called The Manufacturing of a President. It's by Wayne Mansfield. The CIA's insertion of Barack Hussein Obama into the White House. I just happened to pick this up and I'm starting to read it, so it's an excellent publication. All right. Capitalism on the Ventilator, the impact of COVID in China and the U.S. Excellent book on the ventilators. In honor of Cynthia McKinney, who I believe the only person that really cared about the people in the state of Georgia. And through orders from higher up white folks, they got rid of Cynthia. In her book, When China Sneezes, From the Corona Lockdown to the Global Political Impact. We want to thank her. Now, here goes a book, Without Sanctuary. It's a pictorial of the lynchings in the South. And I want the camera person to zoom in. This is the brother that was fried, and the postcards, and all the people gathering when they was hanging us. As Billie Holiday would say, strange fruit. 4 brothers being hung. All the pictures, and it tells you the state hanging from a bridge. All of it. And here we're talking about reparations. And it seemed like nobody has this book. They must have didn't look at this book. They must have didn't see the lynchings, the postcards of black folks being hung in charcoal. And they still say, well, we got to have another study. In honor of Edward Down, his classic, Causes Unknown, the epidemic of sudden death in 2021, 22, 23, 24, 25. And this is a pictorial of people that's dying suddenly. We want to thank Brother Edward Down for his classic book. Rand Paul's book, Deception, the great COVID cover-up. Senator Rand Paul wrote this book, and it's an excellent publication. Now we have our good friend out of Atlanta, Dr. Scott Whitaker's classic, Medicine, Medicin, the causes and solutions to diseases, malnutrition, and the medical sins that are killing the world. Dr. Scott Whitaker did an excellent job on this, and we have these publications for people to go into. Presidential candidate Robert Kennedy, who's getting my vote. The Truth About CO-19 and the Real Anthony Fauci. Robert Kennedy, Dr. Joseph McCullough. He gives you a double header with this book, so you get all the information on what's going on, and they're available at Amazon. But not only does Kennedy go through the first, he comes back with a double header again. The Wuhan cover-up and the terrifying bioweapons war, and vaxxed and unvaxxed. Let the science speak. Dr. Brian Hooker. And it tells you, this book is based on over 100 studies in the peer-reviewed literature that considered vaccinating versus unvaccinated population. Each study is analyzed in health difference among infants, children, and adults who have been vaccinated and those who have not, presented in this context. And it falls under the category of a whole bunch of situations, the infant-child vaccination schedule that we use when we go to school, thimerosal and vaccines, live virus vaccines, the human papillomavirus, HPV vaccination and Gulf War illness, influenza, hepatitis B, the COVID-19 and vaccines during pregnancy. So we want to thank Dr. Brian Hooker for coming up with all this excellent information. So we have these books for people to get Do your research. Spend your money. Purchase. And get information, because a lot of historians went beyond the call of duty because they believed in providing information. So anytime you don't believe what a speaker talks about, he's going to mention books where he got his references from. And when you read something in the book, you know what's there. That's why the book publishing business is real good. Now we're going to have some community events that I talk about for the listening audience and the people that's here to get information, because that's what it's about. Tomorrow, Thorough Black Talk with Tad, Keisha, Ashe, Sister Mama, a.k.a. Sister Marcia, and Brother Black. That comes on YouTube every Thursday at 8 o'clock. Our Blog Talk Family with Sister Empress Chi and the Million Women's March. She has a show that comes on Saturday at 10:30. The telephone number is 1319-527-6189. Sister Empress and Brother Lumumba and them are doing an excellent job with our Philadelphia connection. Ayo Kamati, Sankofa Revolutionary Radio. That comes on every Monday at 10 o'clock. WSYP 95.1 out of Birmingham, Alabama. And that program comes on from 10 to 11. And Ayo Kamati talks about his book and a whole bunch of other information. And you can actually call into this program and give your input. That comes on Mondays at 10 o'clock in the morning. Our Baltimore connection, Powerhouse, State of the City, Darren Muhammad. He comes on sometimes Wednesday, Thursday, but the Powerhouse program that Darren has comes on TuneIn Radio on Saturdays at 12 o'clock. That's State of the City on YouTube and Instagram, State of the City. So we want to salute Brother Darren Muhammad with his information, and he goes beyond the call of duty. Every Tuesday, Dr. Aline, Your Immunity Program. He has a podcast that comes on every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, and we want to salute Dr. Aline on giving excellent information on C-19. He goes beyond the call of duty. Thank you, Dr. Aline. He had a blockbuster program on yesterday, and it's real good. Now, the African Echoes family out of Newark, New Jersey, Brother Trust Graham, Brother Danny, Brother True, and our gang out of Newark has the African Echo Study Group. And they come on every Friday at 8 to 10 o'clock. Trust is the moderator of that group. And they're doing the psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat toward a reclamation of the African mind. So Trust in the gang goes beyond the call of duty with this excellent study group. Also, not only do they give you something on Friday, they come back and give you something on Saturday. And that's out of Asbury Park. The Know Thyself study group out of Asbury Park with Brother True and the gang at Asbury Park. That comes on at 1:30 on Saturday. Trust also is the mediator of that group, and they give you a double header, and they're doing the destruction of black civilization. Great issues of erase. So that's another study group that comes on Saturday, so you get a 1-2 punch. The Simotap organization with Dr. James McIntosh, Betty Thompson, Richard Dean Theodore. We want to say happy birthday to Sister Betty Thompson. Give her a great big hand. Dr. Mac, I'm sorry I missed it, but man, I keep hitting I hit myself in the head because I missed it, but happy birthday to Sister Betty Thompson. And Dr. Simotap organization goes beyond the call of duty. If you got on there today, the gentleman's name was Dr. Payne Carton, and he was talking about the blatant disrespect that Hollywood has portrayed black people, African people in their movies throughout history, and how long are we going to sit by and let these people in the media and these people that make these movies just totally disrespect us in cartoons, from Birth of a Nation, black exploitation movies? And if you get the book by Neil Gerdler called The Empire They Own, How the Jews Invented Hollywood. I'm going to repeat it again. Neil Gerdler, How the Jews Invented Hollywood. It's an invention. And it talks about everything, how they hooked it up in Hollywood and how they just used us. So, with this latest Sigma, the recreation of Good Times, they just took it, made it into one of the most disrespected cartoons out. So the Simotep organization put a letter out, and we letting them know that we are tired of being disrespected in these cartoons, in these movies, and there's black folks all in the mix with them. So I want to thank the Simotep organization and Dr. McIntosh with that. So we got to get on board, cancel your Netflix, call them up. We got a protest going to happen June 5th in front of the headquarters in California and in New York. Because if we don't stand up, they're going to always betray us as a useless, scared, fearful race that has never accomplished anything. They're going to disrespect our kids, our wives, our mothers and fathers, and that's why the historians, Dr. Ben, Dr. Monderson, Dr. Lewis, Dr. Clark, Amos, Dr. Mackey went beyond the call of duty to bring information that is correct, and that's why they fight them. And one of the scholars was talking about on Dr. Mack's program today on how they're getting into all these roadblocks in the black studies departments in a lot of these colleges where they're stopping them, they can't this, they're not giving them tenure, they just want to stop this history. And one of the things Professor Mackey used to always tell us, that we are the glue. We are the people that they are so much afraid of. The Amoses, the Dr. Clarks, the Dr. Men's, the Dr. Lewis, the Renovo Rashidis, Malefi Asante. We are the ones that, because the information keeps coming. So thank you for the program today on Minefield. And I understand it's going to be a new time slot that Dr. McIntosh was talking about today. I think it's going to be on Tuesdays at 10 o'clock starting next week. But you can check the schedule on WBAI. So thank you, and I'm sorry I missed the program. Also, you can view all elections of the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club on YouTube under BK William Mackey Jr. Dr. Lewis's blockbuster series on what's going on in Burkina Faso. Brother Mike Graves. Dr. Monderson's docu-series on what's going on in ancient Africa. He's going to tell you. And this is going to be an ongoing. Dr. Lewis, Dr. Ben, Sister Keisha, Brother Tad. So we're trying to bring the people in to give information because that's what we need is information. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to give, and you can get to all Dr. Monderson's lectures on YouTube on how he's bringing Egypt back home. And he's following the orders that was given to him by the great Dr. Ben. Ladies and gentlemen, give yourself a great big hand and give our speaker a great big hand, Dr. Fred Monderson of the Daily Challenge.
Thank you, Mother.
Got the thing too tight.
Hotep family. It is indeed a pleasure to be with Dr. Ray and the wonderful Professor Mackey History Club. I'm honored to be able to address our supporters across the country. And as Dr. Ray just informed you, our job is really simply to provide information that would empower our people, especially our young, who needs to be properly schooled in tools of intellectual autonomy so that they can be able to meet challenges on a literary intellectual platform. It's strange that as I picked up my folder, I didn't realize, but Ray asked that I should have brought my picture of Sonny Carson. It so happened that I did have a copy of my new book on Sonny Carson in my folder, and I was able to answer his request in a manner that still brings to mind the great Sonny Carson, who was responsible for reinterring his great ancestor Samuel Carson back to Ghana to provide a site of pilgrimage for African Americans seeking their roots in Africa. Samuel Carson, if I should just give you a moment as to who he actually was. Samuel Carson was an enslaved African in South Carolina who escaped and joined the U.S. Navy in 1844. He fought in the Mexican War, and he was killed and buried in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. The Brooklyn Navy Yard at that time was a segregated cemetery. In 1926, the Navy removed a number of the buried Africans in the Navy Yard and reinterred them into Cypress Hills, which is a national cemetery. It's interesting because, given the opportunity to say this, 1926 to 2026 will be a century, and I have created a movement, and I'm going to be seeking assistance to effectuate a ceremony to honor the bones of those that are still in the Navy Yard and those that were removed because, in my view, they weren't properly buried. When I spoke to Professor Clark, John Henry Clark, and I told him about African funerals, he said, we put them away nicely. We don't think that those blacks that were buried in the Brooklyn Navy Yard were actually put away nicely. So as we approach 2026, February, I'm calling on everybody to raise their voice in support of a prayer vigil at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and ultimately if we can raise the funds to erect a monument on that sacred grounds in honor of our black veterans who served this country. So I'll get back to you on that. I always appreciate when Brother Ray gives you the additional information as to available resources that can empower you. Well, I happen to have one of my pieces, which is called, Who Were the Ancient Egyptians? The question which I'm going to deal with today, who were these ancient Africans? And why have they been so maligned? And as Dr. Jacob Carruthers would always say, Hegel, who was a German 19th century philosopher, removed Africans from Egypt and then removed Egypt from Africa. I mean, let's face it, Egypt is in Africa. The question, though, is who were the ethnicities of these people? And I try to deal with this in this particular work. The significance of this work, in addition to the fact that I have presented as much information as I possibly can, I've included a bibliography. There are about 3 or 4 different bibliographies in this work, but a bibliography that pinpoints all that's been said about the ethnicity of the ancient Egyptians. Page, date, and page, so that you could now use this book and find one of these sources, and it's located, the place of what has been said is located in the book. So, who were the ancient Egyptians is one of my classic pieces. You just need to know about it. So, when I was first starting with Dr. Ben around 1972, and he saw that I had an interest as a historian on ancient Africa, he said to me, Monderson, choose one country in Africa, study that, and become a specialist rather than a generalist. So I chose Egypt because at that time there were not many African people in America or elsewhere who was actually studying that. Dr. Ben's right-hand man, Professor George Simmons, always said to me, Monderson, I don't speak about Malcolm X or Dr. King. There are too many people who do that. I speak about ancient Egypt because there's not enough people in this particular area. So whatever you do, keep it up. And for the most part, Professor Simmons sort of adopted me and showed me the way and encouraged me. So I chose Egypt, and I spent nearly almost 40 years visiting, researching, and writing about the subject matter. I know for a fact that Egypt was hijacked by European scholars in the 19th century. A French Egyptologist named Foucault, Georges Foucault, in his researches, he made a revelation. He said that the early Egyptologists made mistakes. And when I mentioned this to Dr. Leonard James, my mentor, he said those mistakes were purposeful. So much so today, the information that is being manufactured and propagandized is that the ancient Egyptians were a red race of people who migrated from Southwest Asia, home on the steppes of the Russian steppes, mountainside, and settled in Egypt. They gave no credence to the role of African people. This is a mistake. It's false. And we have devoted our time to provide our people with the correct information. But why? Because Egypt is important. Egypt is the foundation of all forms of knowledge. And Egypt came out of Africa, fed by the Nile River that flowed, its effluents flowed from Central Africa down the Nile, and because of the environment, the desert region environment, not only were the people able to overcome their surroundings, but they were able to generate civilization. Now, in 2003, Toby Wilkinson did some research in the eastern desert of Upper Egypt. And one of the fundamental things that he said was that civilization did not actually begin in the Nile Valley. It began in the desert region of Upper Egypt in the eastern desert. And also, Thomas Boval and Robert Brophy in Black Genesis in 2011, they did practically the same revelation regarding the people who lived at Nabta Playa on the western side of the Nile. in the desert. So actually, what we see manifesting in the Nile Valley is, as Dr. Clark often said, that civilization began as a screenplay that was researched in Ethiopia and was put on stage in Egypt. So, having said that, my topic today is called the dynastic chronology. As Brother Rere has invited me to return, the second part in 2 weeks will be called Ethiopians in Egypt. But right now I want to lay the foundation so that my followers, and I mean advisedly, they would have some kind of practical and truthful foundation to understand the subject. So much of what I don't like to do is just to come and speak off the cuff. I like to prepare myself, and oftentimes I have to write down what I'm going to say. So please, I ask that you follow me, because this is important, tremendously important, right? So as I'm saying, understanding the chronology of ancient Egypt must be seen or viewed in parallel to the duration of the dynasties. What's a dynasty? It's a family of rulers that may have ruled for one person or several persons, a few years or hundreds of years. The period immediately before the dynastic period is lengthy, but brings us to the dynasty established by Naaman, who introduced Egyptian kingship. The period immediately before the dynasties is called the pre-dynastic, ranging from 5500 to about 3050 BC, as it follows the Paleolithic of a larger time period from 500,000 to 5500 BC. That is divided into the Lower Paleolithic, which runs from 500,000 to 100,000. The Middle Paleolithic, which runs from 100,000 to 30,000. And the Lower Paleolithic, which runs from 30,000 to 10,000. And the Epi-Paleolithic, which runs from 10,000 to 5,000. Dividing the dynastic period from 5,000 to 3050 BC, we find several cultures in the north and south of Upper and Lower Egypt that predate Naaman. Naaman is the individual who divided prehistory from history, establishing the kingship of Egypt after he had conquered the north of the country. So from 5,500 to 4,000 in the geographical division of the country is Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. So Upper Egypt is in the south of Egypt, and Lower Egypt is to the north at the reaching up to the Mediterranean. So from 5,500 to 4,000, Lower Egypt, we have what is called the Fayum A Merimne culture. Conversely, in Upper Egypt, you have what is called the Badarian culture. 4,000 to 3,500, you have, in Lower Egypt, we have Omari A, and in Upper Egypt, we have the Amratian, or Nakwara 1. 3,500 to 3,300, we have Omari B in Lower Egypt, and we have the early Gorzian in Upper Egypt. 3,500 to 3,550, in the north we have Mahdi, and in the south we have the late Gorzian or Nakwara II. Now, when the Egyptologist, the French Egyptologist Alexander Moret posed the question, and there's always the question as whether it's the north, Lower Egypt, or the south, Upper Egypt, which predominated for the duration of dynastic Egypt and which influenced which. So Moret posed the question, by whom was the Upper Egypt influenced, if not by Lower Egypt? And Dr. Diop responded, if this is so, why are the most important cultures and monuments located in Upper Egypt rather than Lower Egypt? Nevertheless, we have to deal with what is called the short chronology as opposed to the long chronology. Now, and there's a lot of political convenience in this. Now, the short chronology begins about 3000 BC, whereas the long chronology can extend from as far back as 5701 BC. So, the short chronology poses a problem for interpreters of the cultural origins of the Egyptians. Some have argued the short chronology is constantly being refined or shortened in order to give preference to Mesopotamia, which is a political, though historically false, reality. Nevertheless, Albert Churchward was a disciple of Jeremiah, who wrote 3 powerful monograms of 2 volumes each. One, A Book of the Beginning, 1882, 2, Natural Genesis in 1897, and Egypt, Light of the World in 1907. Of course, the earlier works of Kung Denon in 1793, Kung Varney that is, in 1793, and Sir Godfrey Higgins in 1836 called Anacalypsis. They were outstanding testaments to the African ethnicity and mental brilliance as seen through unbiased minds. However, in regards to religious practice, Albert Churchward, who was a disciple of Jeremiah, gave a period of some 300,000 years, which I like to call a period of sweet communion with deity, as religious expressions in Egypt, in Nubia, and throughout the Nile Valley. Now we must seek to grasp what is the prize that determines whether it is worth fighting for. Margaret Murray, in the splendor that was Egypt, 1963 and again in 1966, explained what is at stake because of the significance and contemporary objectives of the ancient times. She says, but then again, I'm also reminded of being in Detroit with Dr. Leonard Jeffries and him saying to me, we must thank Dr. Diop. And I asked him, why? He responded, he said that Diop gave us Egypt. The question then becomes, what are we going to hold on to it? Are we teaching our young the fundamentals that empower them to utilize the dynamic engines of intellectual autonomy? Intellectual autonomy simply means being able to be objective in your assessment of research and the data that you encounter. So in her assessment, Margaret Murray wrote, Egypt was the supreme power in the Mediterranean area during the whole of the Bronze Age and a great part of the Iron Age. And as our present culture is directly due to the Mediterranean civilization of the Bronze Age, it follows that it has its roots in ancient Egypt. It is to Egypt that we owe our division of time, the 12 months and the 365 days of the year. The 12 hours of the day and 12 hours of the night are due to the work of the Egyptian astronomers. The earliest clocks, the clepsydra, were the invention of Egyptian physicists. The earliest known intelligent recorded writing is the Egyptian, and so are the earliest recorded historical events. It is due to the passion of the Egyptians in making records that so much has been preserved of their history and their literature, of their religious beliefs and of their religious ritual. This passion for writing made them invent the first actual writing materials. Pens, ink, paper, materials which can be packed in a small compass, were light to carry and easy to use. The argument has been said that the people of Mesopotamia migrated to Egypt and founded Egyptian civilization. Well, if the Egyptians were inventing paper and pen and ink, can you imagine the writing material of the Mesopotamians, which was stone tablets. Can you imagine a student with a bag of stone tablets going to school or whatever? So the argument, as Dr. John Croft has consistently reminded us, Egypt's claim to Africa, Europe's claim to Egypt uses no logic, and this is a good example. So Murray continued, the splendor of Egypt was not a mere mushroom growth lasting but a few hundred years. Where Greece and Rome can count their supremacy by the century, Egypt counts hers by the millennium, and remains of that splendid culture that can now eclipse the remains of any other country in the world. According to Greeks, there were 7 wonders of the world. These were the pyramids of Egypt, the hanging gardens of Babylon, the statue of Zeus at Olympus, the temple of Diana at Ephesus, the tomb of Mausoleus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the lighthouse of Alexandria. Of all these great and splendid works, what remains to the present day? Babylon and its gardens are a heap of rubble. As rulers of Bomb said, they thought of Aleppo. The statue of Zeus was destroyed long ago. The temple of Diana is unbelievably demolished, leaving only a few foundations. Fragments of the mausoleum are preserved in museums where they are a source of interest to learned experts only. The Colossus of Rhodes survived only in legend. So completely has it disappeared. The lighthouse of Alexandria has perished almost without a trace. Of the 7 wonders, the pyramids of Egypt alone remains almost intact. They still tower above the desert sands, dominating the scene, defying the destroying hand of time and dominate and the still more destructive hand of man. They line the western shore of the life of 100 miles, and are the most stupendous and impressive as they are the most ancient of all the great buildings of the world. The anonymous G. Elliot Smith, he was said to have examined something like 5,000 or so mummies. He came out of the University of Manchester. But he never was able to clearly pinpoint who the ancient Egyptians were. Nevertheless, he wrote this book called The Ancient Egyptians in 1911. And he explained, the Egyptians did a great deal more than merely invent agriculture and devise the earliest statecraft and religion. Not only did they devise the methods of working wood and stone and the art of architecture, they seem also to have been the inventors of linen and of the craft of weaving, of the use of gold and copper, and the making of metal tools and implements. They were the first people to measure the year and to devise a calendar, and later on to substitute for the rough calculation based upon the date of the observations of the sun's movements. They also invented shipbuilding and constructed the first sea-going ships. In 1001 of the details of our common civilization, the originality of the Egyptian civilization is revealed. The art of shaving, the use of wigs, the wearing of hats, the invention of kilt and of the sandals, and subsequently of a variety of other articles of dress, many of our musical instruments, chairs and beds, cushions, jewelry and jewel cases, lamps. These are merely a few of the items picked at random out of our ancient heritage from the Nile Valley. The interesting thing about the statements of these 2 writers, keeping in mind, many people, Lorna Oakes and Isha Schwaller de Labis, reminded us, we write for a European audience. So when these 2 people, Murray and Smith, speak of our, they do not mean African or humanity, but European ownership of the Nile Valley cultural history we call Egypt. However, while the historical timeline is not marked by too many high points, there are yet periods of manifest evidence of the African mind at work. For example, 1, I'm going to give you a few ideas here. October 6, 2012, the New York Times article revealed discovery of a paint factory in South Africa dated at 107,000 years. Here, a paint pot containing red paint and brush was discovered. Right-thinking people can envision an individual holding the paint pot, stirring the paint to make a palette. A palette is when the artist prepares to use his work. As he thinks about the work he's about to put on his canvas, which in this case is a cave walls. This act is thought to have pushed complex thinking far back, which was originally thought to have begun at 40,000 BC, but now we're looking at 100,000, where you have thinking Africans. Manetho, he was a Greek priest who wrote a history of Egypt, Greek-Egyptian priest, wrote a history of Egypt, which we know of through commentary by classical scholars, one who was Syncellus. Syncellus tells us of an Egyptian counting board that gives a period of 35,000 years. Egyptians were adept, but you know, there's sometimes we got caught up in what I call analysis to paralysis. So we use the term Egyptians for convenience. You know, some people want you to adhere strictly to Kemet and Kemetians, and I mean, you tell someone in the street who are the people from Kemet, they have no idea. Say Egyptians that identify with that. So Egyptians were adept at stargazing and measured the precession dated at 26,000 years duration. It has been argued to measure one precession means scholars must measure it against a second precession. Dr. Leonard Monroe, out of Detroit, a friend of mine, spoke of two precessions, which means this must be measured against a third. This means 26,000, 52,000, 78,000 years of African stargazing. In 2010, I took my 9-year-old son to the rally on the Mall, a time when they were pillaring Barack Obama during the second year of his administration, the first administration. After that, we went to the Thurgood Marshall, D.C. Community Center to hear Dr. Charles Finch III. He was the author of Echoes of the Old Dark Land and The Star of Deep Beginnings. I put the question of precession to him, and the doctor spoke of a third precession, which means that it may have been a fourth. So, 26,000, 52,000, 78,000, 104,000 years of African stargazing. This time frame is, however, consistent with and approximate to the 107,000 year paint pot. This seems to indicate Africans were not sitting in wait for the white man's word to manifest. 4. More than a year ago, researchers found 2 pieces of, if you will, dressed wood, put together as if purposely as a form of carpentry. This find has been dated 500,000 years. Nowhere else on earth were people so early and industriously engaged. In 1971, the New York Times published the discovery of a hematite factory mine dated at 43,000 years before present. Which means if you subtract the 2,000 years of our era, this gives a time of 41,000 BC. When I mentioned this to Professor Clark, he responded, if you have people mining this form of metal, iron, then you must have a large population necessitating the need and practice of agriculture. Now, this is why we must weigh the evidence, then apply a critical approach in analysis. I am not proposing analysis into paralysis, but by applying the rigors of intellectual autonomy in search of truth. For example, keeping in mind that Dr. Clark has taught and reminded us the people who preach racism colonized history. And when Europe colonized the world, she colonized the world's knowledge. Go to Europe and see what of Egypt is scattered around hundreds of museums and academic institutions. Even further, Europe's claim to Egypt uses no logic. So remembering the Western scholarship that contends we write for a European audience, dictates the evidence is generally colored to elevate Europe against all others, and so must be rigorously scrutinized. As such, the argument that agriculture was invented in Southwest Asia at about 8000 BC, Southwest Asia is the place where the ancient Egyptians were supposed to have migrated from, 8000, and ultimately reached Egypt in 4500 BC, then spread to other areas of Africa, is another fabrication that needs some pushback. We know the existence of sophisticated stone technology in East Africa dated more than 250,000 years. Katanga stone implements, according to Charles Finch in The Star of Deep Beginnings, dates Katanga to 70,000 to 90,000 years. The New York Times, South African iron mine, I mentioned it, is dated at 43,000 before present. The Ishambo bones with mathematical markings is dated at 35,000. As I mentioned, there has been a recent discovery also in southern Africa consists of two pieces of worked wood joined together as if put together by a carpenter that has been preliminary dated at some 500,000 years. There is also evidence of agriculture along the banks of the Nile, as indicated in the magazine Science in 1982, that date to 18,000 to 16,500 before present, which means that if you subtract the 2,000 years, we're talking about 16,000 to 14,500. Africans have practiced in agriculture. So agriculture could not have been invented in Southwest Asia at 8,000. Additionally, in Upper Egypt, we find catch basins in the Upper Nile Valley region that show evidence of early agriculture practice, and mealy holes used with grinding stones to process wheat, barley, and other grown products. We often wonder who invented agriculture. It was women. Okay, so men were generally hunters and women were gatherers. So somehow or the other, this woman threw these seeds in the back of her tent or near her cave or wherever, and she saw it grow, and then ultimately she had wheat. So in time, she became domesticated and began practicing agriculture while the husband would go out and get the meat for the thing. In addition, when she threw that out and she had garbage from the kitchen, that is, animals, they would generally camp near a water hole. So animals would come to drink water at the water hole, and whatever refuse that she had thrown out, they would end up eating that, and ultimately she would be able to reach out to them, pat them, and domesticate animals. So women were in the forefront of farming, agriculture, and domesticating animals that became usual to family relationships. Okay, so the mealy holes are dated between 12,000 and 11,000 BC, and we get this in the British magazine journal Man, M-A-N. Albert Churchward, in Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, states, the ancient writers Eusebius and Cencellus, I mentioned Cencellus before, in their chronicles, tell of an old tablet called the Old Chronicle, containing 30 dynasties of 113 descents during a period of 36,500 years. Bernard Fage, History of West Africa, included interesting insights in the early history of that region. He showed fragments of coal were found at a place called Jos, Nigeria, where remains of charcoal dated at 39,000 years was found, which means it's like there was a fire, somebody was cooking something, and they moved on and left the charcoal there. Whether such sites were continuously occupied is uncertain. What is certain, by inference, is that many thousand years ago, the entire continent seemed inhabited and producing art and social utilities, though much of it has not survived, even though ongoing research is looking into this. To underscore such, Freeman Granville, 1976, gives the following dates for other occupational sites in North Africa. Hawa Fata, 38,750 to 2010 BC. Maliwa Gorge, 31,000. Majes in southern Africa gives dates at Pamongri at 33,500 to 19,700 BC. Floresville, 39,000 to 17,000. And Bufo in the Congo at 12,500. So, contrary to what is said, Africans were industriously occupying the landmass that is called Africa today. Conjecture would let us believe that these early Africans had thought out some of the fundamental human questions regarding nature, science, and spirituality that were working on their social relations. If they did, then the art may have shown it. Still, while not much has survived, the Leakeys, Mary and her husband, Louis Leakey, cataloged hundreds of cave canvases in East Africa that depict African Bushman art using the predominant red. Now, one of the falsities that was propounded is that the Egyptians were a red race of people. Red race of European. Of course, you know, I've already mentioned this before. We have white men, we have red white men, we have black white men, and we got to figure out who is who. Right? So they found these hundreds of canvases colored with red paint, which at the time was a favorite of the artists. It's not that the Egyptians were actually red in color, because at the start of the 20th century, a chemist named Myers said that there was no difference between the ancient Egyptian and the modern Egyptian. So if the modern Egyptian is not red, why would the ancient Egyptian be red? And again, there are so many contradictions that we are faced with, right? We are told that Psammaticus, one of the 26th dynasty kings, had a beef, or the priest had a beef with Psammaticus, and they take 200,000 of these quote-unquote red Egyptians migrated towards Central Africa and settled there. So where are these red Egyptians in Central Africa? That is why we have to develop intellectual autonomy to critically analyze the data as it's presented. I heard right here, one presenter say, my job is to present information. It's your job to assess that information to make sure that it works in your interest. Don't just say, because he says that, and he speaks from a position of authority, then I have to accept everything he says. So there's a lot going on that you need to be aware of. Now, the crux of my presentation. Now, evidence of Egyptian kingship was established by Narmer, a warrior king whose home was Thebes, who situated his capital in the nome of Thith, T-H-I-S-T-I-S, T-H-I-S-T-H-I-N-I-S, and the city of Abydos was located in central Thith. He maintained importance for a long time. Abydos also contains some of the oldest oldest infrastructure, include especially forts, and includes some of the most important early pharaonic internments. This sacred location, Abydos, was considered the world's first holy city of pilgrimage, where the god Osiris was buried, and as tradition goes, he sat at the stairway to heaven, at the top of the stairway to heaven. As king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Kemet Narmer wore a white crown called a Hedjet, H-E-D-J-E-T. One thing about Dr. Ben is that he liked to spell certain terms for you so you'll be familiar with it. Upon conquest, he recognized the Lower Egyptian kingdom, whose symbol was the red crown called Deshret, D-E-S-H-R-E-T. Thus, he united the kingdoms and chose a double crown called the Sekhemti, S-E-K-H-E-M-T-I, consisting of the white crown resting on the red crown as a symbol of the united land. Keep in mind, we have been fed the red and white crown. It's not a red and white crown. It's a white crown resting on top of the red crown so as to show the supremacy of the south over the north. When the two crowns were united into a double crown, it was known as the Lady of Power or the Lady of Flame. So for the next 3,000 years, the double crown became the symbol of a unified Kemet, even though unification was an ongoing process at the beginning of kingship and throughout dynastic rule. So it was never, there was always friction, and that's why you needed strong and vigorous leadership to rule. We know of Narmer from the Narmer palette, a commemorative ceremonial palette made of slate. It was found by Quibel, archaeologists, in 1898 at the Great Temple of Heracleopolis in Upper Egypt. The goddess Hathor is depicted prominently on this document. On one side, the king is shown wearing the white crown, on the other, he is shown wearing the red crown. There is another document also called the Narmer mace head, his weapon. This is an extremely important document in which the king is depicts his capture of 120,000 men, 400,000 oxen, and 1,420,000 goats in his war of conquest leading to the unification. Thus, these Africans were counting in the millions at least 3000 BC. And the fact that they were able to measure the precession at 26,000 tells you that their mathematics was really tight, so to speak. All of this notwithstanding, we still know little about Narmer's origins. While he was buried in Abydos, as he set the stage as an ancestor's burial site. That is to say, because he was the first king of dynasty, he was buried in Abydos, and other kings came to be buried, especially in the first two dynasties, to be buried at the site where their ancestor was buried. I am arguing that his burial may have been following his ancestor kings, because we don't know anything about it. We just know that he rises on the scene and he did what he did and what have you. Abydos is a city from which Narmer launched his armada of conquest, and where Flinders Petrie found 7 or 8 pre-Narmer kings and a city of 14,000 years, while Emile Amelin, who is a French Egyptologist, he found 16 pre-Narmer kings. Of course, Petrie found 10 temples at Abydos that date back to the time of the beginnings of civilization, Egyptian civilization, or Egyptian kingship. You see, what the 10 temples meant is that they may have been divided into different areas in close proximity, but they never destroyed it, they didn't tear down anything. It's like when I was at Oxford University, they didn't, some of the buildings go back to 1000. So they just keep building on top of it, and you can see levels of occupation in those structures at Oxford. So we find the 10 temples, and some of the earliest kings of Erin were worshipping at Amina's 10 temples. We found that Nama, and we found the builder of the Great Pyramid, Khufu, his statue, a miniature statue, was found at Abydos. So given the absence of Nama's roots, a credible question then is there a connection between Nama and the kingdom of Tarseti in Nubia, where on March 1, 1978, the New York Times published world's earliest monarchy discovered in Nubia. There we see an enthroned king wearing the white crown. Remember, the white crown was of the south, it was supreme over the red crown. He was wearing the white. The first evidence of kingship is found in Nubia, and the king is wearing the white crown. A palace facade, that is the front of a building where he resided. The Horus figure, Horus would be one of his titles. An incense burning, okay? Cows and things of that nature. And we find that this was 200 years before we begin to see some of these same things in Egypt, per se. It's like Dr. Clark said, the stage play was rehearsed in Ethiopia and flowed down the Nile, and we find that the theater was actually in Egypt. Significantly, more evidence of Egyptian kingship besides the Nama Palette and the Nama Mason comes from the various king lists. Not only that, but these that have survived provide significant information enabling scholars to practically account for every ruler from Nama to Cleopatra. While the lists for the most part are of the early dynasties, the later periods provide significant corroborating evidence that the entire history of the king's names are clearly established. Regarding these records, Ian Shaw and Paul Nicholson in the Dictionary of Ancient Egypt mentions several such lists exist, although only that in the Temple of Seti I, 1294 to 1279 at Abydos remains. It's called the Abydos Tablet. It lists 76 kings from Menes, Nama to Seti himself, and it remains in its original location. A second list, which is the second Abydos list, comes from his son, Ramses II, who built a temple also at Abydos. This is now in the British Museum. An early example from the temple of Karnak, called the Karnak tablet, was stolen by Chris d'Avenis and shipped to Paris. It's in the Louvre. The Saqqara tablet. So we got the Abydos I, Abydos II, we got the Karnak, and we also have the Saqqara tablet, which is a tablet listing several kings found in the tomb of a nobleman named Tenroy, T-N-R-O-Y, something I call Roy. Then also in the tomb of Amamensu at Thebes, where the deceased, Amamensu, is shown worshipping the statues of 13 pharaohs. Here, Tutmosis I was expressly shown as being painted black. We must understand, however, we must understand that the ancients did not see color as we do today. And they certainly did not use the word Negro. So whenever you find in the ancient documents the word Negro, it's a fabrication. Surprisingly, additional data in regards to chronology of ancient Egypt, according to Shaw and Nicholson, the Huranic papyrus known as the Turin Royal Canon. It was comprised in the 19th dynasty. And the basalt stele known as the Palermo stone, dating from the end of the 5th dynasty, are valuable records. Although both are incomplete, much of the Turin canon was lost in modern times. There are also a few graffiti from the mining city at a site called Wadi Hammamat. And these were dated to the 12th dynasty. Now this brings us to Manetho, the Greek Egyptian priest who wrote a history of Egypt. But his work did not survive except in commentary by classical scholars. His most lasting contribution was the division of the history of Egypt into dynasties that ruled by houses or families of kings. Alan Garden, in Egypt of the Pharaohs, provides some insights on Herodotus, who of course was an earlier commentator on Egypt. He wrote the histories with he devoted book 2, Euterpe, to Egypt.
I'll take her.
After Herodotus comes Diodorus Siculus and the Jewish historian Josephus, who flourished around AD 70. Together with Sextus Julius Africanus, he was 3rd century AD, and Eusebius, early 4th century AD, as well as the compiler George the Monk, known as Cencelus, he was around 800. All of whom helped in the transmission of Manetho's works through their commentaries. Then we come down to Champollion and the many named scholars who labored to place hieroglyphics on a firm footing, especially after Champollion had cracked the code of hieroglyphics in 1822. So on the outer facade of the Cairo Museum at Tariq Square, there is a list of all of the important people who were in the foundation of the knowledge in terms of the literature, and some of them in terms of the early archaeology. While much of this accounts for records of a timeline, they also give evidence of who were involved with furthering understanding of the culture, the history, the literature. Nonetheless, when the calendar was invented, which consists of a trilogy of cultures, the calendar was invented in 4241 BC. And it's interesting, but I created a calendar of my own instead of dating backwards from 4241 BC to 3530 BC to 30 to 2000 to 10 to 800, 700, I create a calendar going forward from 4241 so that 1040 would have been 3200 50 or something, I can't remember. But it's a part of the contribution to the knowledge base that we are trying to provide. So there is a pre-dynastic period that began in 4241 when the calendar was invented, which consists of a trilogy of cultures, namely Badarian, Ambrazian, and Gorzian, as recognized. The last two are characterized as the quarter 1 and the quarter 2. Nevertheless, let me propose a more manageable calculus to view time in the millennium of dynastic Egypt. First, we have the prehistoric, then the following period, the Archaic period, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, the Late period, the Persian, the Assyrian, then Greeks and Romans, and lastly the Muslim invasion of Egypt. If you remember, Dr. Clark wrote the foreword to that book by Butler, and his foreword was entitled The Arab Invasion of Egypt. Of course, these creation of periods are really modern divisions of the chronology. We know of the picture writing, hieroglyphics, hieratic, and demotic. Middle Egyptian seems the most prominent. The term Egyptology has been somewhat confusing, but Sir Flinders Petrie defined Egyptology as knowledge of Egyptian history, geography, and literature, essentially the writing, much of which is religious. The teachings of the monuments. This is what you see when you visit Egypt. Keep it in mind, Dr. Ben Johanan insisted his students regarding the Great Hydrocele Hall in Karnak Temple especially. You must visit 5 or 6 times before you can begin to comprehend what you see there. Therefore, in that divine demigod human coming of age, the king of Egypt came to inherit many hats throughout his lifetime, as prince, pharaoh, and as god. We know his protocols would later include the 5 names, such as his Horus name, his golden Horus, his Tutanbat, his 2 ladies, I explained these, and his son of Ra. Yet Dr. Ben Johanan attributed 9 names to the king. The customary 5, and in addition, where the king functions as high priest, he's celebrating certain festivals. He was the head of the army, and also he was considered a perfect god. Of course, he is also father of the nation. Still, there were others. In all, the name Pharaoh, signifying great house, for as we use the White House to signify the president of the government, is not found before being used in the New Kingdom. So, regarding the coronation, that is to say, when he actually becomes king and he's enthroned, put on the crown on the throne. One of the 5 acts is in announcing his protocol, the names of which foreign and other dignitaries address him, and which will be affixed in documents he will sign. In explaining this idea of the protocol, we have Steindorf and Stell, 1957. He gives us an example of the protocol of the king's 5 names. Here he mentions Thutmose III, the great conqueror. His Horus name was Mighty Bull, appearing in Thebes. The 2 ladies, enduring of kingship. Horus of gold, splendid of diadems. The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, he was enduring of form is Ra, Menkaper Ra. The son of Ra, Thoth, is born, is called Thutmose. Of all these names, the last one alone was the original one, which is given to the king at birth, and by which he was known before the beginning of his reign. The other 4 were all adopted along adopted upon his accession to the throne and were amplified by the addition of supplementary epithets in the course of his reign. So these 5 names that the king had, while the son of Ra was his birth name, the last name was actually his first name, his birth name. His first kingdom name was Horus. So Horus is the first name. Son of Ra was his birth name before he became king. In actuality, there were 9 names that I mentioned before, but the 5 are the principal names. So the Horus name, he was the son of the sun god, he was the son of Osiris. The 2 ladies, these are the ladies who protect the king, Negbet and Wajet. Negbet represented the upper kingdom, Wajet represented the low king. Horus of gold. His body is the same as that of the gods, golden, timeless. Tutanbat, he was king of Upper and Lower Egypt, and the son of the sun, his son of Ra name. He also was called the good god, the double palace, the sunlight gate, and the great well. His son, Tutanbat name, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, was his prenomen. Prenomen, and his son of Ra name was his nomen, Nomen. These 2, prenomen and nomen, are contained in the cartouche or shenus as the Egyptians called. This powerful individual, son of the gods, had one principal function. Excuse me. One principal function. to ritualize and protect the gods that would come to inhabit their homes, the temple. Secondarily, he had to protect the nation from internal and external threats, and also to administer the nation's form of government. And the threats that he was supposed to protect Egypt from, the internal threats, were both actual and spiritual, because they believed that Mal forces would attack the country if the proper rituals were not fed the gods who were protecting the nation. In God's repertoire of his personal paraphernalia, much of which is on display during important ceremonies, such as the processions, the coronations, and so forth, are commented on by E. Jefferson Murphy in Civilizations of Ancient Africa. Murphy tells us, we think of African witch doctors with fantastic, colorful costumes. Look again at a former portrait of a pharaoh. Note that he wears an enormous headdress. From his double-crowned spout, the head of a vulture, and the fire-spitting flame head of a female hooded cobra, supposedly capable of consuming rebels in flame. The pharaoh was the son of the falcon god and was considered a falcon himself, endowed with magical powers and an all-seeing eye. From his waist hangs an animal tail. On his shaven beard he wears a false beard, which is itself considered a god. In his hand he carries a scepter with the head of the god set atop it, recognizable in the curious curved snout, long straight ears, and almond-shaped eyes. Adding more to his fanfare and associated power they represent, Brooks demonstrates further. In processions, banners are carried before the king. These banners bear symbols of many powerful brother gods who have blessed him and whose aid is his to command. Of course, pharaohs also wear jewels of armband, necklace, bracelet, ring, a girdle or apron with a urias, sandals, and he carried a dagger, a flail, and either a mace or scepter, and he also carried sometimes a bow and arrows with which to slay his enemies. Who, as a god and superhuman on the battlefield, could slay hundreds of enemies at a stroke all by himself. His eyes scrutinize the depths of every being. Nothing is impossible for him. Everything he ordains comes about. I mentioned the protocol of Thutmose III, but F. Legge, in the title of the Tainite kings, Tainite means the first two dynasties, 1 and 2, who were buried at Abydos, where Narmer was buried. He speaks of Thutmose I, right? Thutmose I. His Horus name was Mighty Bull, beloved of Man, Lord of Diadems, who rises like a flame, the great twice strong one, Horus of Gold, beautiful of years, who makes hearts to live, King of the South and North, fair incarnation of the double Ra, son of Ra, Thutmose living forever. So this protocol existed not only from the beginning of the history all the way down into the period, so much so that Ptolemy V, during the Greek period, at the end of Egyptian history, he had the same 5 names. His Horus name, Horus Ra, the youth who has risen as a king on the throne of his father, is Lord of Diadems, great, twice strong one, making firm the 2 lands, beautifier of Egypt, beneficent of hearts towards the gods. His Horus of Gold, giver of life to men, Lord of the said festivals like Ptah, Prince like Ra, King of the South and North, heir of the Father, loving gods, chosen of Ptah, strength of the double Ra, living forever of Amen, and his son of Ra, Ptolemy, the living forever beloved of Ptah. This shows that the protocol essentially remained unchanged throughout dynastic rule. Again, the protocol of Tutankhamun, we know him. Horus Ra, mighty bull, living image of those who are born, Lord of diadems, good of laws, who makes the two lands content, Horus of gold, renewer of risings, who pleases the gods, King of the south and north, Lord of the incarnation of Ra, Neb-Keperu Ra, son of Ra, Tutankhamun, Prince of Heliopolis. When they say Prince of Heliopolis, it doesn't mean that he was only the prince of a city, but he was also it's just an added name. He was the king of Egypt. No, two things. First, while Thutmose I is simply Horus, Tutankhamun is Horus Ra, and this continued even until Ptolemy. So Thutmose I is the start of the second king of the 18th dynasty. Tutankhamun is one of the last kings of the 18th dynasty, and Ptolemy is a Greek ruler. So this whole notion of the protocols remain intact essentially. Second, Tutankhamun was significant for coming after the Amarna Revolution. The Amarna Revolution, again, you got to be careful of how we ingest the information that's presented to us. The Amarna Revolution is called the Amarna Heresy. And Amenhotep IV, who led the revolution, changed his name to Akhenaten, A-K-H-E-N-A-T-E-N. He began worshipping, instead of Amun, Aten, the sun god, right? So when he was dethroned, he was succeeded by Tutankhamun, and Tutankhamun issued what's called a restoration decree. Said, listen, we're going to forget about yesterday, we're going to start afresh, we're going to reinstate Amun Ra as king as opposed to Aten. And he established the restoration decree. Dr. Clark liked to say that Tutankhamun was a minor king who got a major funeral. And the jewelry that he took into his interment indicates how wealthy he was put away. Remember, Dr. Clark said, we put them away nicely. So imagine the type of jewelry, treasure that the great pharaohs, Thutmose, Ramses, Seti, carried into there. And all of this was lost because their tombs were discovered and rifled from ancient into modern times. So, the principal roles of the king or pharaoh situates him, one, as a warrior pharaoh. One of the principal functions of the king was to defend Egypt from internal and external enemies. An enduring motive throughout dynastic rule is the king grasping the enemies of Egypt by the hair and about to administer a death blow to them. Thus the king is always seen as a fighting pharaoh. The unifiers. The people who unified the country. So we have Nam or Medes, the one who organized the armada and sailed from Abydos, conquered the north, unified the country, chose the white crown over the red crown, and created the double crown of the white crown resting on the red crown. Dr. Diop said he was Theban even though he left from Abydos. Abydos is for the north, Thebes is for the south. There he conquered the north and unified the land, initiating the dynastic period. Geographically, Upper Egypt extended from Elephantine, where Aswan is, all the way towards where the pyramids are. So when we talk about Egypt divided into two kingdoms, 93% of the Upper Kingdom from Aswan to Memphis was African, if you will. And the other 7% was more towards the Mediterranean area, Lower Egypt. It's like when I go to Egypt, I'm often asked, you go to Sharm el Sheikh? No, that's where the tourists go, the wealthy people, when they have the beaches and whatever. I go up south, where the African people are. The farther south you go is a more colorful Africans you find. Of course, as Dr. Diab said, that's where the great cultural centers and the monuments are located. Now, the only thing in the north is the pyramid, and it's actually at the forefront, at the frontier of Upper Egypt, where for practical business purposes or whatever, the pharaohs decided that they needed the staging area to deal with Asia or the Mediterranean. So we have means uniting the country. So Dr. Diab said he indicated that means was Theban, and of course his major works were African origin, civilization, myth or reality, and civilization of barbarism, and authentic anthropology. Of course, Diab is the father of the resistance movement, so to speak. Cultural resistance, but cultural upliftment. Mentuhotep II united the country after the first intermediate period and founded the Middle Kingdom. Of course, according to the Canaveral tablet, Mentuhotep fought another prince named Intef on the plains of Thebes in Upper Egypt. Then we have these brothers contending for power. So he was coming out of the pass at Thebes and run into Mentuhotep, situated, ready for battle. So it wasn't feasible for him now to challenge Mentuhotep because Mentuhotep was already organized and ready to charge. So he said, wait a minute, brother, and then he called his mother, Queen Atotis, and he said, listen, Mom, I want you to go to, because oftentimes these guys would take their family members, their wives and their mother or whatever, to see the battle that they would be waging. And he asked his mother to go to Mentuhotep's mother and see if we could work out a deal between these two brothers. And they agreed, which shows the influence that these African women had this early in time. So they agreed, settled the differences on the battlefield, and founded the 11th dynasty or the Middle Kingdom. They joined forces and established the 11th dynasty and Middle Kingdom, and the Middle Kingdom was actually fleshed out in the 12th dynasty, because by that time the foundations of unity was reimposed, reinstated, and therefore the succeeding dynasty was able to put things together. Until that time, after the fall of the Old Kingdom, the first intermediate period, and the beginning of before the beginning of the 11th dynasty, Middle Kingdom, Abydos was considered the door to the north. The door to the south, the door to the south. With the consolidation of the new kingdom in the 11th dynasty, they decided they were going to push north just as Norma had done to unify the country, and Abydos then became the gate to the north. So the door to the south was now turned around as the gate to the north. We often wonder about these people. Who were these people of southern Upper Egypt? Right? So Flinders Petrie is considered the father of Egyptian archaeology. There are a lot of them, 50, 60 years digging. He acknowledged that the 17th dynasty, coming from Nubia, held Thebes as his capital. Thebes is always considered the fighting province. These brothers were at that James say, those brothers wasn't joking over there at 17, 18, 19, 20 then. In the family of warrior pharaohs, we have Sekenenra, Tao, Kamos, and then Amos, sequentially in chronology, then as kings. So, let's backtrack a bit. So the Old Kingdom dynasties 3, okay, let's go again further. So we have the Archaic period, dynasties 1 and 2. We have the Old Kingdom dynasties 3, 4, 5, and 6. We have the breakdown of centralized authority at the end of the 6th dynasty, and we have the 4th intermediate period, dynasties 7, 8, 9, and 10. We have the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, dynasty 11 and 12, 13 and 14. At the end of dynasty 14, invaders called Hyksos invaded, conquered the country, but settled in the north and forced the southern conglomeration to pay them tribute. Okay, they ruled for 2 dynasties, about 200 years, until one day, one of the kings became so arrogant, he sent a note. He said, listen, I can't sleep at night. The hippopotamus in the river, 1,000 miles up the river, are making so much noise. Shall be a hippopotamus. So Amun-Ra, in a messenger, or however, advised the 17th dynasty, I want you to go north and punish these people who rule in ignorance of Ra. So the 17th dynasty began a war of liberation that lasted for 50 years through these 4 kings that I mentioned. Second Tao, Kamos, and finally Amos was finally able to expel the Hyksos and found the 18th dynasty. The 17th dynasty and the 18th dynasty were basically the same people, but because it marked a different epoch, the creation of a new state apparatus, then we have 17th and 18th dynasty as separate rather than single. So, as the war of liberation or expulsion of the Hyksos expanded, with the great men fighting in the north, Queen Tetisheri and Ahotep, mother and daughter, were faced with a palace coup initiated by Teti the Handsome. Remember I said that one of the functions of the king was to protect the country against external and internal enemies. So Teti's rebellion was really an internal threat to the nation. So these warrior women, Tetisheri and her daughter Ahotep, gathered the remaining loyalists and put down the rebellion, saving the throne for their progeny. Amos, who married his sister Nefertari is considered the most venerated woman in all of it, and she's clearly black, we have evidence on that. You see, one of the falsities that our people were fed was that you may have heard of the Nefertiti earrings, and many of our people ran to buy. Nefertiti was a foreign princess who came to Egypt to marry Amenhotep III. He already had a wife named Queen T. So the wife said, my husband is too old, marry my son, Amenhotep. Excuse me, Amenhotep IV. So we want to celebrate black womanhood, celebrate Nefertari, not Nefertiti. Nefertiti came in, became a wonderful wife, but because she was foreign, Asiatic, she gets more press than the black one, okay? So, as Dr. Clark likes to say, Nefertiti was called, actually her name was Tadyukipa. So the Egyptians couldn't pronounce her name, so they called her Nefertiti. The fair one, beautiful fair one coming, that was her name. But Nefertari, she was called the most beautiful woman. The most beautiful one coming. Of course, Nefertari was the most venerated person in all of Egypt, Egyptian history. And she was clearly black. I heard, what's his name? The brother, the brother that was doing, he died 2 years ago.
Runoko?
Yeah, Runoko Rashidi. In his new book called the Van Sertima Papers in 2015, he showed, he liked to go to these museums, he showed one of the images of Queen Ms. Nefertari in the Berlin Museum, where she was shown inequality beside her husband. You know, those black men of that time respected their women and held them on an equal basis. They weren't walking behind the husband and walking beside them, and sometimes they were advising him. So evidence indicates that she was in fact black, Ethiopian, and what have you. And even her husband, Amenhotep III, James Bonwick, in Egyptian Ideas and Modern Thought, said that Amenhotep III, the Magnificent, was so dark, he was considered Ethiopian. Okay, so forget about the Nefertiti earrings. Okay, so when we speak of the king's functions to defend Egypt against external and internal enemies, Teti-Hansen rebellion is a classic case of internal threat. We must also understand, even within family relations, treachery abounds, for women in the harem were always plotting so that their son, not another son, becomes the old king's successor. In one instance, there was a failed coup, and in another, the king was assassinated. And the son was on the battlefield, and somebody whispered to him that your dad was killed. And he left the battlefield that night and hurried back to the palace to assume control. I often refer to this as, like today, when modern revolutionaries seize the government, the first thing that they do is they block the airport so that no planes can come in and bring in reinforcement. They seize the radio station, they begin playing martial music, and then tell people, well, we are now the new reality of power. I'm often reminded of sometime back in the 70s or so, the people, the ruler of Senegal was Houphouët Boigny. So the people were just dissatisfied with Boigny, and they gathered and protested, and they moved up they ran up to the palace. I said, Boigny must go, Boigny must go. And Boigny came out and said, I'm all you got, so you gotta live with it. Right? That's what the military would do today. So the king left the battlefield, went home, seized control of his kingdom. Even his men didn't realize he was gone until he sent back word to inform them what had happened. So after that, we get what is called the co-regency, the establishment of a co-regency, where the king now chooses his successor, announce it to the world that this guy here is going to succeed me, so that there will be no misunderstanding as to who the next king will be. In his foreign policy relations, the king married many foreign princesses who came to create a political marriage. Well, as Dr. Obenga tells us, these pretty ladies were nothing more than concubines in the king's harem. The king had his real woman, his real wife, who sat, his queen, who sat next to him on the throne. All these pretty ladies come in, they went in the back room, wait until he was ready for them. Pianke of the 25th Ethiopian dynasty, and next permitted, invited back, I will discuss the Ethiopians in Egypt. He left important evidence of the kingship process on his way to Heliopolis. See, wherever the king was crowned, sometimes he was crowned in Karnak or wherever, he had to return to Heliopolis, where sun god Ra was worshipped, where he was spiritually, psychologically, and intellectually transformed into a deity, a god. We know this because Pianke left evidence of it. Okay, and this is why the Ethiopians in Egypt were so important. Okay, the Shabaka stone tells how Ptah created everything. Ethiopian. Recently, Anthony Browder was working on clearing two Ethiopian tombs of Karak, Amun, and Karabashin that is supposed to be opened either this year or this new year or next year or whatever. So the Ethiopians were very instrumental in rescuing, recuperating, and advancing Egyptian culture that had begun to become Ethiopian. So we have events of Bianchi at Heliopolis. He even washed his face in the cool pool where the sun god bathed. This is in the writings. The Shibaka stone tells of how Ta created everything that was. Taharqa built extensively in Egypt. Taharqa was a magnificent young man who, at 21 years old, he was a grandson of Pianki. At 21 years old, he became king. He was put in charge, before he became king, he was put in charge of Ethiopian and the Egyptian forces that confronted the Assyrians as they threatened Egypt. His brother Shabataka was considered a usurper, so he killed Shabataka and took over the country and ruled it for 20-some years. But he was a great builder as well as a warrior pharaoh. So we say that he was that there were wars again. There were internal wars and there were external wars, right? First of all, we have in the Middle Kingdom, Usertesen I. He left a stela to the south of Egypt with the inscription, "We have come to overthrow Wawat." Wawat was a state just to the south of Egypt and in Nubia. We have the Battle of Megiddo, Thutmose III, 18th dynasty. This king conducted some 70 military campaigns, subduing Asia and collected much booty, which he donated to God Amun-Ra and Karnak Temple. And a lot of building was conducted. He was a great builder, just as Hatshepsut was a great builder. Amenhotep III was a great builder. And then we get to the 19th dynasty. The wars of Seti I, Seti 19th dynasty. He fought wars in Lebanon and in Syria. His military exploits are represented on the outer face of the Karnak Temple hypostyle hall, the North Wall. The Battle of Kadesh. Ramses II, his Seti's son, also of the 19th dynasty, fought in Syria, and as such, all his temples at Luxor, the Ramusia, Abu Simbel, Bitwali, they're all decorated with the conflict particulars, how he was able to thwart the Confederated soldiers who had massed against him. Battle against the Sea People, Ramses III, 20th dynasty. He never fought a battle until he was ready and was so successful. Ramses III, his mortuary temple, was considered the last major building project of the New Kingdom. It was decorated with episodes in the history of his military campaigns as they unfolded throughout his reign. So we have to understand, temples are generally built outward. And the problem we have today is that as moderns ascend the temple, they change the orientation. All right? So his temple, mortuary temple, when we say mortuary temple, we mean, okay, so they were, in the Old Kingdom, the God and King temple was one. By the time of the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom, they became separate. So we have a God of worship temple, and we have a king of mortuary temple. So the mortuary temple was the temple which the king would be worshipping when he died. Now if he was strong, vigorous, and he lived a long life, he could be worshipped while he was still alive in his temple. So his temple was built from the inside of the sanctuary area, and it indicated, the inscription tells you of the different battles that he fought. And this temple is also important because the festival of men is evidence of the festival of men is located in the second court of Medinet Habu temple. It's interesting, you've heard about Shuala de Lubis. Shuala de Lubis writes, scholars are amazed to find a black guy represented in the Festival of Men. Why? Because they were all black people. You know, I was once, Dr. Ben used to tell us, believe 40% of what the guy is telling you in Egypt, because they don't know. Most guys will borrow his brother or his cousin's license to enter the temple as a guide. But you know, he may have been through there a couple of times and knows where, it's like the dog, you're walking your dog, he knows where he's been before. So he tell you, this is a column, that's the thing over there. All right, now, take a few pictures before we gotta go. The Festival of Men is about black people. The black guy makes the king a god. I was in, but it's just a part of what is, Dr. James used to call it, distortion and omission. So I was in the, what is called the Ramesian front of the Temple of Luxor. And I was working on it because I go there. Listen, I've been going to Egypt nearly more than 30 years, practically every year, sometimes twice a year, and I'm taking photographs. So I'm working out in the Ramesian front, and I saw this guide marching a group of Chinese people into the temple. Now this temple is about 1,200 feet long, right? 1 minute and 30 seconds later they were leaving. What could you see within that short period? Okay, so in that court, in the court of Ramses II, there is what is called the ascent of the princes. It illustrated the princes, the sons of Ramses II are going to the temple. So the facade of the temple is indicated in the court, and you have the procession of the princes, and you have the procession of the priests leading these fat cows. Every time I take my sons over there, I said, watch this. The lead cow, one of the lead cows in the procession shows an African, a Nubian woman coming out of the head of the cow. Now Hathor, as the goddess represented, like I mentioned, on the normal palette, she had a temple at Deir el-Bahari. Right? She is often interchanged with Isis, but she represents an earlier form of female divinity that was practiced outside of Egypt. That I'll get to that now. So all these guys come in there, but they never take. Either they don't know about it, or they don't let their people know that this was a black woman heading this procession to the temple. It's the same way that the modern scholars are amazed that this guy, men, is in the middle of everything. One of the faces, I call it the quintessential face in some of my writings, is of an African. Most places you see him, his face is disfigured, because he has the African features, the nose, that Ben used to call it sausage lips and what have you. It's disfigured, but there's still a lot of it. Burckhardt, the German, says that he was the prince of the city, which means that he was a high official. He was a king. He had a beard, right? The same short beard or long beard, but generally they would have the short beard. Of course, the beard is. You remember I mentioned that in the uniform of the king, among other things, he had a beard. He was clean shaven, but oftentimes he either had his beard on his chest. Hatshepsut ruled as king, and she was told that, well, you can't be king because you don't have a beard. So she got a beard, hung it on her chest like I would my tie, and she said, see my beard? So this guy, he has a short beard. We know that the king has a straight beard, and the god had a curved beard. But sometimes the king also has a short beard. I don't know if you ever, some of you could go back to the 1960s. Pharaoh Sanders, the great jazz trumpeter, when he came to the east, then G.2 Wilson invited him. He got the name Pharaoh because he had a short beard. Right? So this guy has got all of these attributes. Right? But we don't hear that. We're not seeing that in the even the current. Look, I go to Egypt, I buy books. I'm sorry, you guys don't buy my book. Look. Ray, tell you all these books. Every time I come here, tell you, but I don't see anybody running up there buying those books. Here's my, who are the ancient Egyptians? Okay? You want to know about what I'm talking about? It's right here.
Tell me where to get the book from.
It's on Amazon. Or you can write me. I got a few copies. I'm at the African Festival, July 4th. I'm over there, okay? Yeah. Of course, don't forget Sonny Carson. And I got 50 books on Amazon. Give me a play, you know. Like I said, Pianke fought a war with the North to unify the land and founded the 25th dynasty. And his son, Taharka, 21 years old, he was put in charge of both the Ethiopian and Egyptian armies as he fought against the Assyrians. Imagine, at 21 years old, what bravery, courage, and capability that this young man was able to demonstrate. So let's talk about the parents of the king. Let's talk about Ra. The first king, he was the first king of Egypt, right? Ra had 14 cars. Now check this out. I know you're going to ask me in question and answer if there's any. Okay, so Ra had 14 cars. Hatshepsut claims that she had 12 cars. And Ramses II, he said, I have 30 cars. I don't know about that. But the 14 cars of Ramses, of Ra, were who? Here they are. Who? Creative utterance. Zephyr, abundance. Shops, wealth. Shems, service. Ire, making food. Hiking, magic. Boaz, freshness. Tehen, sparkle. Nat, victory. Usa, influence. Ku, brightness. Pest, gleam. Wash, honor. Salt, preparedness. Okay, so Ra had 14 cars, Queen Hatshepsut boasted. She had 12 cars, Ramses II claimed he had 30 cars. Those who sat on the throne of Egypt were considered successors or sons of Ra, as the son of Ra title indicates. Nut, in the pyramid text, the goddess Nut is quoted as saying, the king is my eldest son who split my womb. Geb is quoted as acknowledging the king is my bodily son. Osiris was the son of Isis, and Horus was the son of Osiris and Isis. Amun. Evidence shows Amun, disguised as King Thutmose I, appeared to the king's wife in a flash of light and perfume and showed his god nature, thereby impregnating the queen with his essence. Later, when shown the young child, Amun acknowledged, yes, that is my offspring. Queen Hatshepsut was a great storyteller and extraordinary and culturally creative ruler. Both Amenhotep and Alexander the Great followed in Hatshepsut's footsteps in claim of being sired by a divinity. So, explaining this unique concept of divinity, leaving the heavens to have intimacy with a human female is indeed extraordinary. In this respect, Theophilo Benga points out in African philosophy the Pharaonic period. It was in the reign of Queen Hatshepsut that the myth of the Pharaoh divine birth was first recorded for posterity in canonical form, in images and text. Tradition has it that God Amun took the form of the queen's father, Thutmose I, and appearing in a flash of light and perfume, engendered the divine infant within her earthly mother, Moses, who after taking care to reveal himself to her as a god. I don't know what he did show her, but she was convinced. The board of kings Amenhotep III and Alexander the Great were situated in a practically identical scenario of the biblical story of the birth of Jesus Christ. Another example of theogamy, that is to say, the union of God or divine spirit with an earthly woman of flesh. Even Alexander the Great got into the act of being of divine birth. Perhaps in payback, gratitude, he rebuilt the sanctuary at Luxor Temple, as did his brother Philip, who rebuilt the Karnak sanctuary. Hathor is seen nursing the king. Hathor was older than Nama, giving her prominence on his palate. Just as Toby Wilkinson in Genesis of the Pharaohs, 2003, found Egyptian cultural antecedents in Upper Egypt's eastern desert, and Boval and Brophy in Black Genesis, precursors of the Pharaoh, 2011, found in the western desert, pastoralists who practice cow culture. They worship a mother goddess and so we see a connection with Hathor, who is often shown has cow's ears, even as she was represented as a cow and a female. We see Hathor coming out of the mountains of Deir Bari, protecting the king in her shrine, and Hatshepsut suckling the cow udder that Maspero described as she was a milker to boot. That is to say, she had, evidence that she gave milk. An Old Kingdom explorer found Hathor, and this is important, it's key. He found Hathor worship beyond Egypt's borders, that even the Egyptians were not aware of this. Right? So, where did Naka get his Hathor image from? It's up in here. Goddesses. These female divinities sometimes act separately or in concert with others to perform some divine act. J. Wilson, The Culture of Ancient Deep, provide insights of the king. As an athlete, his arms are mighty. He has the power and the prowess of a god. While he was considered a god, we ask, did he promote this as a form of propaganda to strengthen his claim to the throne? It is possible this idea was first promoted during the Archaic period, Dynasties 1 and 2, while the fundamentals of the society were being codified and established. As a good shepherd, ruling through bond, the principle of true justice, righteousness, his role was seen as was key to keep his people and country safe and secure against actual and spiritual forces. As an intermediary between the people and the gods, Lani Bell pointed out the king could transcend 3 realms of heaven, earth, and the netherworld. He functioned effectively for the sake of humanity in carrying out his kingly mandate. He was fair because he could see everything, he knew everything, could be a friend or foe, of profound influence or vengeance. Invincible. He was very successful on the battlefield, though claims of the mightiest of deeds could be considered mythical. So, we must seek to understand temples must be viewed in time perspective. That is, prehistoric, Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, late Greco period. In prehistoric or pre-dynastic times, temples were simple and built of flimsy material. In the Archaic period comprising Dynasties 1 and 2, they began to slowly experiment with stone material. However, sometime during the Old Kingdom, the transition to use of stone became the norm. By the Middle Kingdom and certainly the New Kingdom, temple building in stone became the standards to make mansions of millions of years as imperishable structures. While the Old Kingdom God and King temple were fused, by the Middle and New Kingdom, they became separate. As such, they were worship God temples and mortuary of King's temple. and I'm bringing this to closure. That is, the gods look out to bless his creation. The temple is built from the sanctuary outward. The king and all others look into worship and ritualize, and so enter from the outward regions of the profane world via a number of steps or inclines into the sacred realm where the God's seat is located in the highest point of the temple. Thus, as the visitor enters, the floor rises and the ceiling descends, thereby contributing to the God's perch at the highest point in the temple. And so, the temple, when we speak of the temple, when we speak of the sanctuary, the temple is the sanctuary of the God. But once we're in the temple, the sanctuary is a special place where the ritual is performed on a daily basis, 3 times per day, that only the king and the high priest can enter into that super sacred realm, even though there is often a procession that comes to the cusp of the temple, bringing food, water, clothing, incense, musicians playing, and all of this is done before the king opens the doors of heaven, greets his divinity, and performs the daily ritual. So, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I think I've covered most of what I wanted to cover today, and I want to thank you for your patience in seeing that I was trying to provide some knowledge that can be beneficial to everybody. Thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, give Dr. Monderson a great big hand. Zoom audience, do you have a question for the doctor? Anybody on Zoom, do you have a question? Unmute yourself and ask Doc a question. Going once, going twice. Anybody from the floor?
I have a question.
Yes.
All right, Ms. D.
I didn't understand what you were saying, Dr. Monderson. You were talking about rawhead. Did you say 14 cuffs, 14 gods? Did you say, I couldn't understand what you were saying? Forgive me.
You see, it's like, it's a sense of spiritual consciousness.
But what was the word you were using?
Ka, K-A. Right?
Ka, K-A.
Yeah, Ka. Kas, K-A-S is plural.
And what does that mean? The gods or what?
No, it's spiritual forces within.
It's what kind of forces?
Spiritual forces.
Within.
Within, yeah.
Yes, the
Powers that the God had. That's why I gave you all the names.
So spirit would be Ka. I would say body, mind, and soul. The soul is the Ka.
Yeah. Just as you would see this floor with the tiles arranged in this manner, so in the same way the soul is divided up into these various attributes of the Pharaoh, of the God, which includes many of the things that I mentioned: strength, wisdom, I need to go over them again.
So Ka is the division of the soul.
Yes, spiritual powers within the body of the individual. Strength.
Okay. Zoom audience, you got another one, Ms. D?
Yeah, I did. You were saying earlier too that the temples went through different time periods. The new kingdom, the old kingdom, and the something else. Like, like 3 or 4 different.
Well, we were talking about, you came a little late. So the theme of today was the chronology from the beginning to the end of dynastic period. And it's a 3,000-year period that was divided into different periods. So you have what's called the Archaic period, the Old Kingdom, the first intermediate period, the Middle Kingdom, the second intermediate period, the New Kingdom, the late period, and then the Greeks, the Romans, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans, then the Mamluks or Muslims. So that spans the 5,000 years of Egyptian history. But I'm only concerned with the 3,000 years. I don't go beyond the Ethiopians of the 25th dynasty. The other guys that were made. But of course, I have to, when I go to Egypt, I have to go through the Greek Roman temples. They're not really, they're considered Greek Roman temples, but they were built by Nubians, Egyptians on the Egyptian specification. But at the time, the Greeks and the Romans were the overlords, and in some respects, they were trying to placate the gods. They placated the priests who had control of the people, so they have built temples, and they hope to inculcate some of the powers that the pharaohs had. You know, so the periods represent parts of the chronology from the beginning until the end.
So the 3,000 year period?
Yeah.
3,000 years?
Well, I did go to 500,000 all the way down to 3,000, and then from 3,000 down to the Greeks and the Romans.
That's a lot of
It's about, as Brother Ray puts it on YouTube, you can follow in that respect.
Dr. Monderson, you
Yes.
have a question, Ms. D?
And the temples were made out of different materials, were they not? I guess as time came to love after 3,000 years, I guess the materials would change.
Yeah. But principally, we're dealing principally, okay, the domestic citizen, his residence was generally made of brick. All right? But the God and the king's temple, the God's temple was of stone, made of stone. And so too, the temple of the king was also made of stone, because they're supposed to last forever. All right? Now, the nature of the material used vary. Whether it's used granite, granite, alabaster, different things like that. For example, if you go to at Saqqara, one of the pharaoh's pathway to the temple was made of alabaster, and it's still in place. A lot has changed from the time, The destructive nature of time and man has removed much of the evidence of construction. But things that were buried, like tombs in the mountains or whatever, have survived, even though many of them were rifled and their contents expropriated, But the structures above ground, for the most part, they have disappeared. Though some of them were covered over by detritus and sand, and so they were preserved, and thanks to the work of the modern 19th and 20th century archaeologists, they begin clearing. When you see what had remained after thousands of years, you have to give these people credit for the work of clearance. But by the same token, it's just like we speak of naked imperialism during the slave trade, and then enlightened imperialism, right? So enlightened imperialism, naked imperialism, the Europeans took whatever they wanted. In deluding the Africans of their wealth and so forth. With enlightened imperialism, they came back and said, well, look, we want to help you, but you have to pay us. So they took the minerals, control of the minerals, right? Now, we go from native imperialism to enlightened imperialism, and now we went into intellectual imperialism because they began stealing the knowledge that was unearthed in the excavation periods. I call it the ancient records of the ancient records. Okay, that's the area that I specialize in. 1870 to 1930. This is when the great body of work was done to excavate and recapture the evidence that was buried, whether in pyramid, whether in cemeteries or in case tombs. So we go from naked imperialism to enlightened imperialism to intellectual imperialism. So much so that museums across the world. There was a book by put out. One of the things that we must be conscious of is that the American University in Cairo Press. There's an American University in Cairo, and there's an American University in Cairo Press, that they're doing a lot of hands-on field work and publications. But some of their books are designed and noted not for sale outside of the Middle East. That is to say, whatever they don't want the outer world, like let's say we here in the United States, to be able to access and assess this kind of information, whether it's falsity or whatever, is being fed to those people in the Middle East, or especially the Europeans who come to Egypt seeing themselves as Egyptians. Right? I think it was in 2005, I was in Egypt with my niece in the Cairo Museum, and we had this young girl, young lady that was a guide, and she tells us that Mentuhotep II, I mentioned his name, that he was painted black because of the funeral ceremony. And I had to ask her, who told you that? She said, my teachers at the American University in Cairo told me. Of course it's false, you know. But there is information being shared over there that is false, that unless you're meticulous and scrutinize it, you'll fall for that. You know, that kid said, if you don't stand with something, you'll fall for anything.
It's not only falling for anything, but what do you know?
Well, you got, like, but remember, the books that he's telling you, that's a treasury of knowledge. My books, you need to help me. Let me say this to you. I bought every book that Dr. Ben published. Many of them he autographed for me. And there's one book called Africa, Mother of Western Civilization. And I hope, and this time maybe I'll bring it. He autographed the book saying, I give this book to Monderson. Most of the articles are, oh, but Monderson, well, I don't understand why he says, I'm giving this book, Mother, to Monderson. Right? Maybe he's hiding the mountain, you know, I don't know. But that's what, but my job is to research and write.
When you mentioned Hyksos, I heard Amos, one time we was talking in the office on 138. Amos said when the Hyksos invaded Africa and tore up destroyed the pyramids and the statues, he said we didn't know what war was until they rolled in there and did what they had to do in fighting. They destroyed us and destroyed all those pyramids and cut the noses off and...
No. It's not like that.
No.
Okay.
Let me just ask a question. Just let me say the question. He said we didn't know what a whooping was when they came in. Now, were they Jews?
this whole notion of Jews wasn't born here, okay? The Hyksos were Asiatics. That group of people, of that area, right? I couldn't live with them. But the point is that there were a gathering of people who invaded as conquerors because the Egyptians were not able to defend themselves. So they conquered the country and ruled for 2 dynasties. They forced the Egyptians of the south to pay them a tribute. They ruled from the north because the north was closer to the external realm from which they came. Okay, at a certain point in time, you get tired of the man pushing your feet, you're stepping on. So this, they ruled the 15 or 16 dynasties. They created 15 or 16 dynasties. So one of them sent, the last one, so to speak, he sent a message telling the blacks in the south. He was nearly 800 miles away. He said, the hippopotamus bathing in the river, making so much noise at night, I can't sleep. And he was way over there. So they take that to be a sign of arrogance. I decided, let's go down there and show this guy what time it is. So in a 50-year war of expulsion, they were able to capture the entire country and kick them out and follow them into Asia. And with that, the Egyptian army became transformed into a fighting machine. But that's not to say that they didn't know what war was. They fought among themselves. One of the things that Aristotle, the great Aristotle, made, which was, it's been said that it's one of the first times that something said was right and wrong. Right? Aristotle said the Egyptians and the Ethiopians were cowards. The Egyptians and the Ethiopians were black, and so they were cowards. Well, he did admit that they were black, but they were not cowards because they've been fighting wars. Only that in that, I never really got to it, but the black soldier, okay, right now. I mean, we've been fighting every war since America's had. Before the War of Independence, against the Spanish, against the British, the Mexican War, the war in Spain, World War I, World War II, war against the Koreans, we're not cowards. We will fight when forced to. Okay? And one of the problems that forces in this country refuse to acknowledge is that we are trained. In the Battle of Savannah, during the American Revolution, France sent Haitians to fight against the British. Haitians were involved in the Battle of Savannah. My father is from Savannah. I told him, he is big. He said, I never heard of that, but that's a fact. So when Haitians went back, they said, we've learned the ways of the white man. What he meant is that we learned how to load the muzzle and the breech, not like that, from down here. And we learned how to shoot the cannon with great accuracy. But you uses that to put that shell in your back pocket. Okay? So, blacks know how to fight.
All right, Zoom, any question? No question, Zoom? All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. And thank Dr. Monderson.
Okay.